Howdy. Welcome to the Gmoto Podcast, a brand new DIY forum. I'm Thornton Gallimore, and we're going to be joined today by my brilliant and talented uncle, Paul Haynes, who I call Tony. And this show is about machines, mechanics, DIY work, and the mindset behind keeping things alive. Between the two of us, we've certainly worked on more metal, wood, pipes, wires, machines, and houses than we could ever keep track of. From lawnmowers and chainsaws to aircraft and heavy equipment, if it leaks, squeaks, burns fuel, or requires some type of license to operate it or touch it, we've probably wrenched on it at some point. Both of us have formed skills as mechanics and also as handymen with real estate maintenance, house flips, and long-term rental property management. Overall, we've learned something the hard way. Everything breaks. The question is whether you know how to fix it. When I asked Tony, to join me on this podcast, we had planned on both sharing some of our personal important influences. And when we started talking through it, he mentioned, how in the heck am I going to summarize over 50 years of experience into just a few minutes? He's been a master of DIY for decades, and he and I have grown very close over the years. He's my overall DIY ally, my in-the-know bro, and more than anything, he's my dear friend. All right, I'll start us off with some core memories of how I was led to become fascinated with DIY and mechanical adventures. My father, Alan, was a carpenter, and I remember my dad taking me to jobs with him as far back as I can remember, probably 4 or 5 years old. We would go to job sites in a very small rural town in Virginia, and I would get to help him carry the essentials, the toolbox and the radio. These are probably some of the most deep-rooted memories of my fascination with working on things. I can vividly remember going to Floyd Baptist Church, just me and him, and I'd carry that toolbox and radio down the hallway and from room to room. I'd hand him nails, pick up debris, and follow him around in pure admiration. Also around this same age, probably around 5 or 6 years old, at home and at my grandparents' house, there were little tubs of Lincoln logs and erector sets, and these were my go-to. I think those little toy sets are pretty impactful for developing a young mind. So this fascination carried on through the years, and I was also blessed by being around an entire family that was rooted in blue-collar work. My grandfather, Paul Haynes, who, Tony, your dad, I call Paul. He operated a very successful generational water well drilling business for decades, and this was equally impactful to my fascination and gave me constant exposure to such a great variety of machinery and systems and tools and vehicles and heavy equipment and just nitty-gritty hard work. I have some very special memories of Tony when you had your race team. I just remember the sound of a 350 ripping down the front stretch at 6,700 RPM and the smell of Cam 2 in the garage. I was just hooked for life. I really hope that we'll get to talk more about your Harvey Wallbanger years. Tony, that was just a fascinating time. I remember how excited I would always be when I got to go to my grandparents' house. The first thing I would do when I got over there would be to run over to the magazine pile that was in the living room by an old rocking chair. And I would sift through the newspapers and magazines to find the latest issue of Summit Racing. I would go through every page. I was probably 10 or 11 at the time, and I didn't have a muscle car or anything to work on, but I learned and dreamt about those pages. I knew the latest options on performance headers and carbs, oil pans, heads, cams, cranks, rods, you name it. I knew every page. As a teenager, maybe 13 or 14, I would go to my stepdad's garage and I would just disassemble and reassemble things, driven by that same fascination. I remember taking apart an old Echo 2-stroke trimmer. I stripped it all the way down to the piston rings and all, and then I reassembled it, even just reusing the old gaskets. and it was amazing to fire it back up at the end and hear it run. And when I was about 14, I would go with my stepdad, Charlie, who was a big influence to me, and we would mow and we'd eat yards for just a little bit of extra income. The first thing I wanted to buy was an ATV. So I saved up a few $100s and I bought a crusty old Kawasaki Bayou 220, and I had a blast with that thing. And every time I would have a little issue, I'd be diving in to see if I could figure it out. Electrical, carb work, suspension. I learned so much with that machine. Then, when I was about to turn 16, I needed to find a car, and I wanted something that I knew would be cheap and also something that I would be able to work on. So, by the grace of God, my uncle, the man, the myth, the legend, Tony, you sold me this 81 Ford Escort L. This car was outstanding. It was a 4-speed AM radio chariot of excellence. He sold me that car out of his field for $150. I ended up taking the back hatch off every once in a while, and I would put my Bayou 220 in the back of the car, haul it around, and ride it all over the place. And in my mind, I was the king of rednecks. Then as a teenager, I went on to further expand my mechanical journey, and I had a variety of cars through my teenage years. My passion was totally locked in, and I would always do my own maintenance, pay for my own insurance, parts and repairs. And when I was 16, I was working at Wade's Supermarket in Christiansburg, and I wanted to work somewhere that I could engage more of my mechanical persona. So I got a great job at a farm store, CT Farm and Country in Christiansburg. And that was another key development in shaping my mind as a DIY junkie. All the farmers, mechanics, and tradesmen would come in there and they'd have their projects, and I'd always love getting to see and learn what they were getting into. When I was 17, it was time to get out of small town USA, and I followed in the footsteps of my brother Joe Gallimore, and I went to see a recruiter about enlisting in the military. The Air Force recruiter did a screening, and the results were overwhelmingly pro-mechanical, and then my ASVAB further proved that it was a path that I was meant to follow. He offered me a few jobs, and I ended up choosing fighter aircraft maintenance. And as you can imagine, that's when my skills really began to develop. Passion met profession, and the Air Force does a very good job of starting with the basic fundamentals of science and then building on those principles block by block. There was about a year of hands-on training, and then I began my work as an F-15 crew chief. I worked for 20 years as an aircraft mechanic, F-15s, C-130s, Cessnas, C-17s. I had a fantastic maintenance career. And through my years in aircraft maintenance, I naturally evolved mechanically at home as well. I always had an ATV or a dirt bike or a street bike in my garage, dozens of recreational machines of all sorts over the years. My dirt bike and street bike years were some of my favorites. That's where my Gmoto moniker came to be. Gmo is one of my military call signs. Gmo as in Gallon More, Gmo, hence Gmoto. At any rate, me and a unbelievably great network of talented fellow mechanics and DIYers with the likes of Ricky Taylor, Shane Hawley, Sam Starlin, Chris Boots, Ken Beatty, Nick Hoffman, Ashley Schultz, Mikey Kell, Jeremy Allen, Rich Hall, Eric Campbell, Trick Schroeder, Ryan McGee, Chris Kickler, Ryan Wilson, and literally hundreds of more talented, very talented folks. So I've been around an amazing crew of gearheads practically my whole life. And we would often completely rebuild houses and overhaul vehicles and ATVs and motorcycles in our garages in Virginia, North Carolina, Idaho, Arkansas, Alaska. I would make little custom parts and pieces, mostly things like brush guards, roll cages, exhaust, and fairing brackets. And I would often take scrap metal and grind, drill and polish and weld and customize things to my liking. That's when I learned how to fabricate and weld, and I still have the same little 110 Lincoln MIG welder from back in 2002. But I carried this lifestyle on for many years, and things took a swift change in 2017. I was married now, and my wife Anna and I were blessed with our first kiddo, Max, and physically, he was up against so much right from birth. He spent many months in the NICU, and I remember trying to understand all the medical lingo and the medical team was trying to explain to us. And then there was this one dude who told me somewhere along the way, he said, humans are surprisingly similar to machines. Two major systems, plumbing and electrical. And that was finally something that I could really relate to and understand. And that revelation led to a new fascination, a new urge that I hadn't felt in a very long time. I began to think about the human body in a mechanical way, and it just made sense. And of course, humans are much more complex than just plumbing and electrical. We have pain, we have emotions, we have spirits, unlike machines. But comparatively speaking, this concept of thinking of the body as a machine really helped me learn and grow. Once we finally got settled and got Max home, with all that medical equipment, the ventilator, the trach tubes, the G tubes, suction machines, medications, at that point, it was far beyond a fascination. It was about the survival of my child. And that's a whole nother galaxy of passion and commitment to learning and growing. Another level of DIY intrigue was expanded through my family and mentors. Anna's dad, Max Gentry, he's another very influential figure in my life. He was not only a subsea engineer for a half a century, but he and his small team were probably the best in the world. Mr. Gentry and Mr. Michael Montgomery and Mr. Ben Bradford, these guys were world class. Max and I have become very close, and he's very much a DIYer just like us. And his stories from the field and his travels all around the world are absolutely incredible. So a few years later, one of my best mentors, Angela Peterson, she's one of my Air Force mentors, she pulled me to the side one day and she asked me, she said, why don't you shift gears, no pun intended, to go into the medical field? And at that point, I was on a stellar career path. I had an incredibly successful enlisted career. I told her she was crazy, but she didn't let up. She pressed me on it because she saw the passion that Anna and I had with Max. She showed me a program that transitions enlisted service members to become officers in the medical field. They had an option for nursing, and she helped me understand that it may indeed be a wise career move for me, and it certainly was. I've been an OR nurse for nearly 4 years now, and it's been the most rewarding, challenging, and humbling work that I have ever done. So that's where I am now, 25 years of experience in the mechanical field, machines, houses, and humans. And I think one of the most fun parts about being a DIYer is the fellowship and the camaraderie. If you intentionally surround yourself with people that you respect and trust and enjoy sharing DIY strategies and experiences with, you're absolutely going to succeed because now you have a team. And a team, especially one that's capable of supporting and facilitating each other, can achieve remarkable mechanical freedom. No longer do you have to call the man. Tony remembers that Andy Griffith episode. No longer do you have to call the man because you are the man. So let's move on to your story. Tony, can you tell us about your roots as a gearhead?
Hey, how you doing today? My name is Paul, and first of all, I want to say thanks to the Gmoto host for having me on the inaugural Gmoto Podcast. He asked me to ask a question, and the question was how I got to be a DIYer, a do-it-yourselfer. That's a great question. Like a lot of young boys in the 60s, I got into model cars. You remember those? You got those boxes with the small pieces, you cut them apart, and you use that toxic glue. Which is probably what happened to me later in life. But anyway, So building these model cars, I was always switching up the parts, making modifications to them, and building these, really goofy looking things because I just like to change the things up and see what they look like. But then after that, growing up in a water well drilling business with my family, my dad was growing the business and things were pretty tight. We couldn't just go out and buy stuff. So you kind of fix what you have with what you have. And keep in mind, during that time before duct tape, it was tie wire or baling twine. And my father was a big influencer there. I didn't pay as much attention as I should have, but he had stuff everywhere. He'd built old school. He grew up in a depression. They didn't have a lot. So you either really, built what you needed or you fixed what you had or you just did without because you just didn't have the money to go out and buy stuff. But he had stuff everywhere in these little buildings and tucked around, and some of that stuff's still around. Some of it's gotten lost over the years, but it's just a amazing man. But that came out of that necessity. But he also taught me the value of hard work and not giving up. Now, he was a grumpy old man at times, and sometimes you thought he just didn't like you or didn't want you around. But, now that I'm close to that age, I can kind of understand that now. But I got a lot of fond memories of working with him on well pumps and vehicles. But I lost him when I was 24 years old, which was way too soon. But Gmoto, it's kind of like you losing your dad when you were a very young boy. It's just those things happen too soon. And then my dad, he's a huge influence as well. He showed me a lot, but he really wasn't a great teacher as far as teaching you how. He led by example and letting you do things and experience things. If you know, you know. The one little quick story is that I was 16 years old. I had my driver's license and, hadn't driven any big trucks, and it was like a Ford kind of dump truck sized truck. And it was a 4-speed, 2-speed rear end. And we were on a job site, finishing up. My mom stopped by, happened to be in the area. Well, Dad hopped in the car with her. I said, what am I going to do? He goes, drive the truck home. I can't drive that truck. I've never driven one of those. He goes, you'll figure it out. Well, it was probably 10 miles back to our house. I figured it out. It wasn't pretty. There was a lot of grinding gears and missed gears and stuff on the way, but I made it home. But that was my dad's way of, hey, you can do this. You can figure it out. So when I was in school, as a 6th grade, I took an interest in industrial arts and welding and took those classes in school, just super interested in building stuff and, trying to do fabrication work, stuff like that. Got involved with the FFA in high school. That was another building block of my do-it-yourselfer and just kind of getting things done and making things. After graduation, I tried college. It really wasn't for me. Probably one of my regrets in life. But there again, it's not for everyone. 1980, I went to work for our family business, Haynes Drilling Company. So that was a great start. Worked there for a really long time. And like a lot of people, my do-it-yourself journey was due to what I'll call 3 things. Necessity, couldn't afford to buy or couldn't wait. Money, this is the cheapskate syndrome. I didn't want to spend the money. And then the other thing is interest. Just like doing stuff. Just enjoyed it. Building, fixing, changing, modifying, all of it. And that gives you a sense of accomplishment. Then in 1986, things got interesting. A good friend of mine, Don, and I decided we wanted to race asphalt circle track. We've been hot rodding and street racing for years and had been interested in circle track racing, NASCAR. Harry Gant was our hero, the Skull Bandit at the time, and we just wanted to see what we could do on a racetrack. Well, that's a whole nother show, but I will tell you that first year that we built our car was 1986. The winter of 1986, we started it. It was painted up like the Skull Bandit, green, the white, had the little bandit on the hood of it. It was pretty cool. But there again, that's another show. But we built that car that winter. We started racing this spring of 1987. And Don, I will say, a great influence. He was a premier mechanic. He was a line mechanic, a local Pontiac dealer that went to a Ford dealer, that opened up his own shop. A great influence on me when it came to working on cars and troubleshooting and figuring things out, how they worked, what to do, what not to do. Lot of good, some bad. You know, there again, if you know, you know. But I learned a lot about vehicles from him. Then the fall of 1987, things got even more interesting. I bought my first house, and it was a basket case. Needed a complete remodel. We first went and looked at it. It had like 4 feet. It was been set empty for 2 years, and had, you know, I think 3-4 feet of water in the basement, and it was in rough shape, you know. And I knew nothing about something on this scale, but I looked at it as a challenge. And here again, the money was right. The price was right to buy a house, even if I had to put a lot of sweat equity into it. And then the other thing, I had to have a place to live. So we lived in this house while we worked on it. You know, no heat the first winter, slept using a kerosene heater in the living room, just bundled up. It was very, very interesting. And there's a lot of stories to tell on that one too. But back to the original question, what influenced me to be a do-it-yourselfer? Well, I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of stuff that plays into that. And it just, you know, I'm almost 65 and a lot of life experiences. There's too much stuff to go over in just 30 minutes. But, you know, from model cars to firecracker cannons to well pumps to drill rigs to race cars to motorcycles to diesel engines to house repairs, even accidents. You know, those things happen. You know, sometimes you got to learn the hard way. And then the people. There's just too many people to go over. But, you know, I'll keep it short. And we're going to we'll do family first. You know, my dad, you know, his dad, my grandfather, you know, my mom was certainly there raising me and taking care of us. And then you have my grandmother, my dad's mother. You know, she was such a positive influence. She was always saying, you can do whatever you want to do. You can be whatever you want to be. Just go for it. And sometimes I listened to that, but to my regret, a lot of times I didn't. I hesitated. You know, and so, and then you got even, you know, I will say that the host of Gmoto, TG, you know, even later in life, I look at him and his career and what he's done with his family, and he may not know it, but that was a great influence on me just to see where he's at, what he's done with his life. It just was. And then you got, you know, the other guys outside the family. There's Don, my good friend. There was the guy that worked for my dad. His name was Kevin. We called him Bear. Rough guy, but he taught me a lot about family and loyalty and hard work and holding true to your word. And, you know, and then there's your faith. You know, I will say your faith is what's going to keep you through everything. Your faith in God. Hold true to that. Follow him, let his will work out in your life, and you can't go wrong. Will there be rough steps along the way? Absolutely. But God's going to be your rock, and he'll be there with you. And the last thing is, you know, my message, give it a shot. What's the worst that's going to happen? Well, besides getting killed or maybe getting maimed, you know, but aside from that, you know, give it a shot. All these people that start businesses, they start and they fail. They start and they fail, and then it just takes off. So follow your dreams and do what you want to do. And thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Very nice. What great examples of where your fascination began and how it has developed over the years. You've been an absolute essential part of my growth and development since I was a kid. And that's why I felt it was important to audibly document our journeys, because I hope this might inspire people to seek out mentors and to share their DIY adventures with their friends and family, which really does make projects a lot more fun and doable when you have someone there to root you on and bounce ideas off of. And Tony, you've certainly been that for me. I am forever grateful for our unique bond. So that wraps up our premiere episode on DIY origins and adventures. A very special thanks to Tony, Mr. Paul Haynes. Thank you, Tony. I look forward to many more discussions with you soon. Next time we'll talk about DIY mechanics' perspective on cost, savings, parts, tools, and environments. And we're going to have some special episodes on particular engines, such as the 7.3 liter Godzilla, the 3.5 liter EcoBoost, maybe even get into the 6.7 Power Stroke a little bit. We'll get into some DIY home maintenance and real estate discussion. Lots more interesting content yet to come. This being the premiere episode, please feel free to email me any comments or content suggestions at gmotopodcast@gmail.com. gmotopodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, Godspeed.